Hey everyone, and welcome back to World of Tanks with Nubicon. Today, I thought we'd take a look at the Panzer Jagar Ausf, which is the official designation for the German tank destroyer, the Jagdtiger. Following the success of the StuG III, the Marder 1, the Marder 2, and the Marder 3, the German military decided that it wanted to take existing fighting vehicles and also turn them into self-propelled guns, just as they had done to create the StuG and the Marders in the first place. German tank destroyers of World War II mostly used fixed casemates instead of a movable turret to significantly reduce the cost, weight, and materials used for mounting large caliber guns. Early in 1942, a request was made by the Army General Staff to mount 128mm guns on self-propelled armoured chassis, and on the 18th of May 1942, Adolf Hitler granted their wish. He ordered that the 128mm gun be utilised in the tank destroyer role rather than for the infantry support. Firing tests were run on the 128mm, the 88mm, and the 105mm gun to test to see how accurate each one was. As it turned out, the 128mm hit its target far more often than the other two, which of course meant that it was far more appealing to use the 128mm for the anti-tank role. By early 1943, a decision was made to start installing the 128mm gun on either the Panther or the Tiger I chassis to turn them into heavy assault guns. However, after wooden mock-ups were created of the Panther chassis with the 128mm attached to it, it was concluded that the chassis of the Panther just wouldn't stand up to the task. This left them with the Tiger chassis. However, instead of using the Tiger I chassis, they opted for the Ausf version of the Tiger, which of course, as we all know, is the Tiger II. A wooden mock-up was created and presented to Adolf Hitler on the 20th of October 1943 in East Prussia. After approval from Adolf Hitler, two versions of the design were produced, one using the Porsche suspension system and the other using the Henschel 9 overlapping wheel suspension system, which was also used on the Tiger II. Both were completed in February 1944. And originally, the designation for these two were Panzer VI, but later they became known as the Jagdtiger. The Jagdtiger design was just simply a step up from the Jagdpanther design and the idea of using a casemate structure on the top of the tank, which is just simply a boxy structure, which is integrated fully into the hull. In the case of the Jagdtiger though, the Jagdtiger actually used a lengthened version of the Tiger II's chassis. The results of this design meant that this vehicle featured very heavy armour and the 128mm Pak 44 L55 gun, which was capable of defeating any tank fielded in World War II, even at ranges longer than 3.5 kilometers, which is 2.2 miles. Now, the Tiger II already had an upper glacis that was 150mm or 5.9 inches thick. Now they've added this casemate to it. The casemate, the front of it, had 9.8 inches, which is 250mm of armour, which meant that the front of this tank was really heavily armoured. Now the problem with this tank was that it had a very limited traverse of its gun. The gun could only be moved from centre about 10 degrees to either side, which unfortunately meant that the tank itself, the complete tank, had to be turned in the field in order to be able to aim at targets that were outside that 10 degrees. And being such a heavy tank, the Jagdtiger suffered a lot from mechanical failures and technical problems because of the overwhelming weight and the underpowered engine that it had. Unfortunately, this meant that the vehicle itself suffered far more losses from mechanical problems or lack of fuel than to any kind of enemy action. Originally, 150 Jagdtigers were ordered, but by May 1945, and these numbers are subject to a lot of discussion and talk even now, only about 77 to 88 were actually produced. The first 11 Jagdtigers that were built were fitted with the Porsche suspension, but all that followed that were fitted with the Henschel suspension instead. Only two heavy anti-tank battalions were equipped with Jagdtigers. These battalions were Battalion 512 and Battalion 653, with the first vehicles reaching the units in September 1944. Tiger Ace Otto Karius was in command of the second of three companies in Battalion 512. Later in life, he would go on to write his memoirs into a book entitled Tigers in the Mud. This included his adventures with the 10 Jagdtigers he had under his command. In these memoirs, he goes on to state several times that the Jagdtigers themselves were never utilised to their full potential due to several different factors. Allied air superiority made it very difficult to move these large tanks. The massive gun needed to be recalibrated from jarring after travelling off-road for even short distances. The vehicles were slow. The transmission and differentials broke down easily because the whole 72-ton vehicle needed to be rotated to traverse the gun. While not in combat, the gun itself had to be locked down, otherwise it would have worn out the mounting brackets inside the tank too much. This also meant that just before combat, or sometimes even during combat, a crew member had to exit the vehicle and unlock the gun before it could be fired. In spite of these problems, however, Ottokarius was impressed by the gun itself, especially when he records that a 128mm projectile coming from the gun went through an entire house and all of its walls to destroy an American tank behind it. However, in the end, the biggest problem for the crews under Karius' command was the fact that they had insufficient training and really poor morale. This showed up in a lot of places. At the Ruhr pocket, 2 of the Jagdtiger commanders failed to attack an American armoured column about 1.5 kilometers away in daylight for fear of attracting an air attack, even though the Jagdtigers were well camouflaged. Both commanders also felt that it was in their best interest to get out of the area in a hurry because they feared an air attack. An air attack, of course, which was not coming and had no signs of it actually ever coming at all. But in the end, they decided to get out of there, and while they were hurrying, running away from the area, both of the Jagdtigers they were in command of actually broke down, and one of the crews felt it was a good idea to destroy the tank that they were in. Later on, in Siegen, Karius himself decided that to prevent such a disaster happening again, he would use his Jagdtiger at the center of the ambush that he was setting for the American armored column. And so he took his Jagdtiger and dug it in on the higher ground. Unfortunately for Karius, the approaching American armored column was actually warned by the civilians that there was an ambush waiting for them. After that, things just seemed to go from bad to worse for Karius and his people. The Jagdtigers continuously kept on breaking down, and one of them was lost when it fell into a bomb crater at night and was disabled. A further one was lost to a Panzerfaust attack by your own troops, the Volkssturm troops, who had never seen a Jagdtiger before. Near Una, one Jagdtiger climbed a hill to attack 5 American tanks 600 meters away and below. 2 of the American tanks withdrew, and the other 3 opened fire. The Jagdtiger took several hits, but American projectiles could not penetrate the 250mm or 9.8-inch frontal armour. However, the inexperienced German commander lost his nerve and turned around instead of backing down. This exposed the thinner side armour of the Jagdtiger, which was eventually penetrated, and all 6 crew members were lost. Karius wrote that it was useless when crews were not trained or experienced enough to have the thick frontal armour facing the enemy at all times. After being unable to escape the Ruhr pocket, Karius ordered the guns of the remaining Jagdtigers destroyed and surrendered to the American forces. Of the 10 Jagdtigers under Karius' command, only 1 was lost in combat. 8 others were lost because of breakdown and destroyed by their crews, and 1 was lost through friendly fire. As you can see in the replay that I have in the background, I'm using the 8.8cm Pak 43 version of the Jagdtiger. This was actually a variant of the Jagdtiger. It was the StuG 185, and was designed because of the shortage of the 128mm Pak 44 gun, but this variant did not enter service. So, let's just finish off this artillery here. We'll go and have a look at their post-game stats. So here we go, first class mastery, 3,413 experience, that's doubled of course for the first win of the day. Came second on the team, did 2,094 damage. Yeah, not too bad a game. T29 on our team had a rather good game by the look of it. ended up making 84,395 credits from the 94,365. 4 credits, sorry. And you can see that the repair and the resupply, especially the resupply, even though I fired a lot of shots, was not very much. So yeah, not a bad game, the Jagdtiger 8.8 centimeter Pack 43. But now I've got to run. Feel free to leave us a comment. Maybe you have a story about when you've been playing your Jagdtiger, something funny happened, or maybe you just have a story about gameplay in general, or maybe you just have a good story to tell. I don't know. Any comment you like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That really does help us out. And don't forget to like the video as well. And I'll catch you all next time.